But before we kick off with our first band, who were waiting patiently in the sidelines there, have we got any Genesis fans in the room? Just a few. Just a few. Okay. Right. Can I have a first image, Rob? Anybody familiar with that particular album? Yeah? Do you recognise it? Yeah. Okay. Now, are you familiar with the back of the album cover? Can we have that, please? Right, this particular gentleman, Richard Macphail. Yeah? Can I have the next picture, Rob? Here he is, backstage with Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel at the recent Genesis gigs. Okay? And he just so happens to be here today. He looks a bit different than he did on the back of the album cover. Right, Richard will be here all day. He'll be out the front. He's got a book that he's written there called My Book of Genesis. He'll be signing that and obviously having snaps and whatever. But we're also going to be bringing him on in between bands to do a few stories about life in the past.
Including one about that picture.
Yeah. All will be revealed.
Hello, everybody. Richard Macphail here. I've been given a bit of a slot to show you some pictures while the changeover's going on. That's what I used to do. Now I do this. I'm not sure which is anyway. So I don't know if you can see this through the drum kit, but the story starts at an English public school. Boom. I hope the next government are going to take their charity status away, because it's an absolute fucking scandal. I've got to get political on you already. Anyway, this one's called Charterhouse, and on Saturday afternoons, a lot of the chaps used to dress up in white and play cricket. I used to dress up in white, but I did it to pretend to be Mick Jagger. Because I started a band at Charterhouse with Ant Phillips, some of you may know, and Mike Rutherford, some of you may know. And I thought a good name would be Anon. You know, like a poem where they don't know who wrote it. The trouble is, back in the mid-'60s, nobody could cope with the idea of a band that didn't start with a the. So everybody called us the Anon. So it wasn't a very successful name. There you go. In the background there, you can see our bass player, whose name was Rivers Job. That was in the end of the summer of 1966, after which we both found out that we'd not gained any O-levels worth speaking of. And in fact, our parents took us away and sent us to other institutions. Rivers ended up becoming the bass player of a band called the Savoy Brown Blues Band. Some of you may remember. He ended up taking too much acid and kind of one of those casualties and blew his mind. He ended up dying under unfortunate circumstances in 1979. But he was a great inspiration to me and a wonderful musician. And I still remember the day that he told me about Eric Clapton. He said, there's this guitarist, people call him God. He plays with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. And in the half term of that term in 1966, he dragged me off to a club in South London. I never used to go south of the river, called the Ram Jam Club, to see John Mayall's Blues Breakers, including Eric Clapton. And I don't know if you remember a gig when you were young that you went to that kind of blew your mind. Well, that was the one for me, and thanks to Rivers. People used to have parties in holidays, and we used to play at them. So you can see Anthony Phillips there, and Rivers at the back, and me in my groovy Carnaby Street glasses. They were really crap. They fell apart after 2 days. The guy in the middle is actually called Mick Coleman. And it should have been Mike Rutherford, but Mike Rutherford was constantly battling with his housemaster, who used to confiscate his guitars and beat him and say, "You cannot play in the band." So Mick was our stand-in. He did a good job. After Rivers and I left Charterhouse, Mike Rutherford and Ant Phillips wanted to write songs and make a tape, and they asked Tony Banks, he's in the middle. Can't see past all the crew. Anyway, they asked Tony Banks to come and play piano. At that time, that's all he did. He only played the piano. And he said, "Yes, I'll come along as long as I can bring my friend Peter Gabriel, because he's quite a good singer." And basically, Genesis got started. Did any of you see Mastermind on Monday? The first question was about the guy down in the corner there, the first drummer of Genesis. Genesis were a bit like Spinal Tap. They had a lot of drummers. None of them actually exploded on stage, but Chris Stewart down there was the first drummer. He went on to go and be a farmer in the south of Spain, and he wrote a book called Driving Over Lemons, which is, some of you I'm sure will have read. Sold 1 million copies. So that's what he did. The end of the summer of 1969, my parents had a cottage that they were going to sell, and they wanted to wait till the spring. So it didn't look like that. And so it was going to be empty for the winter. It had been burgled, and it's a bit unfortunate. So I said, "Well, can my friends and I live in your cottage?" Because that was the thing that people did in the 60s. They got it together in a country cottage, and this was ours. It was only an hour from London. There was no one else anywhere near, so it was an ideal place. Mike Rutherford later said, "At the cottage is where we became a band." And it gave them the chance really just to do nothing except get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, and start writing music. And the music they wrote during that winter was this album called Trespass, which, again, some of you may know, contains a track called The Knife, for instance, and Stagnation. It's a good album. Early in 1970, Peter Gabriel married his childhood sweetheart, Jill Moore, and as you can see, it's quite a grand affair. This chap here, the one on the far, whatever end that is, as you're looking at it, the right, is Philip Moore, Jill's father, and he was the Queen's secretary. So the wedding took place in St. James's Palace, all very fancy. Meanwhile, out in the car park, there's me with my top hat on, because I read an article people find these amazing things and put them online. There was a newspaper article about this event, and I was listed there with my name spelt wrong, which is always the way. I'm now nearly 74, and I'm still trying to get my name spelt right. But I was described as a groomsman. I don't know what the hell a groomsman is or did or what, but there are quite a few interesting characters here. Second from the left is a man called Tony Stratton Smith, and he ran Charisma Records. The thing about the 70s, or the late 60s into the 70s, is that the music business was run by amateurs. I mean in the pure sense of the word, people who loved the music. And Strat loved two things. Well, two things that I can repeat in polite company. One was music, and the other was horse racing. And he would only ever leave London to go to a horse race. But fortunately, we got a residence in a club in Soho, upstairs at Ronnie Scott's. They were desperate to compete with the Marquee. Failed miserably. But fortunately, on those Tuesday nights, Strat's office was only round the corner. So he came with Gail Colson and John Anthony and saw us play. They were the only people in the audience. And the next day we went and signed to Charisma. So it was very fortuitous. On the left, in the white suit, is a man called Fred Munt. And he was the production manager at Charisma. And he taught me everything I needed to know about being a roadie. And I'm still grateful to this day. Because once you've been a roadie, you're always a roadie. Aren't you guys? You're always looking to see, what's needed and wanted. Prior to this job, he was the tour manager for the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. Many of you will remember, with a wonderful character called Viv Stanchel as their lead man. And if you remember one of theirs, they had a wonderful song called Intro and Outro. And they're introducing all of these crazy people, General de Gaulle and et cetera, and one of them is the Wild Man of Borneo, and you hear someone playing the bongos. Well, that was Fred. That's Fred's claim to fame next time you hear that. I found out the other day that Paul McCartney produced I'm an Urban Spaceman. I never knew that. That was a big hit for them. I love rock trivia. So I'm in the middle in the hat. Can't believe how thin I was. Steve Hackett's next to me, looks exactly the same. And on the right is Gail Colson, who became a friend in early 1970. She was Strat's PA, and she's still a very good friend. That's actually a picture at the wedding, Mike Rutherford and his girlfriend. And the guy on the right is called John Alexander. Now, kind of winding back a bit, when we were all at Charterhouse, I'd left. When they were all at Charterhouse, they made a demo tape. And Jonathan King, who some of you may remember, had been at Charterhouse, and he had a hit called Everyone's Gone to the Moon. And he came down in his new sports car to show off for an old boy's day. And John Alexander's the one who had the courage to go up and thrust a tape into his hand. So that began the relationship between Jonathan King and Genesis, which was rather short-lived. The only thing Jonathan King did was to name the band, because for him it was a new beginning of producing stuff that wasn't his own. Incidentally, he also named 10cc and the Bay City Rollers. So that's his claim to fame. Quite good names, all of them. So we joined a stable at Charisma, and on that screen, I'm not going to tell you all they all are, but there's Van der Graaf Generator, Rare Bird, all the members of Genesis. I don't think, for some reason, and the guy who used to be the drummer for the Nice, Dave, help me. He had a band. Brian Davidson, thank you. Thank you so much. In fact, that's him. Yeah, so there's quite Audience. That was another band. So we variously toured with all these people, and it was all jolly good fun. Eventually, we got to go abroad for the first time, and here we are on the boat crossing from Dover to Ostend, middle of winter, no one else around. So I opened this big box on the deck, and they were full of these. I managed to get them all to wear them, which in the case of Tony Banks, I can tell you, it was no mean feat. Unfortunately, one of the roadies, no, he wasn't one, it was the only other roadie. He had a camera, so that moment was captured. 1972, we went to Italy for the first time. Now, at this point, the band were getting very frustrated in the lack of progress they were making. And we showed up in Italy, where we'd been playing to 20 people in a basement in Scunthorpe. suddenly there were thousands of people in these big sport palaces. They had the worst acoustic you could imagine. You know, I was mixing the sound, but quite honestly, nothing I did made any difference. But it didn't matter. The Italians loved it. And they showed up in their thousands. We did 2 tours that year. You can't actually see me in that picture. As a roadie, what I loved about these gigs is that you could just drive the van straight up to the stage and unload everything. And then the van became the dressing room for the before and after the show. So Italy really took us to their hearts, and it was very, very encouraging. And the band thought, well, if we can do this in Italy, we should be able to do it elsewhere. When they went on tour, they did a tour in 2007, not the last one, but the one before, called Turn It On Again. And they finished the tour in Europe with a free concert in Rome, and 500,000 people showed up. My book has subsequently been published in Italian, so I'm pleased to tell you that all of them have bought the book. The percentage of those 500,000 who bought my book, I think, is almost too small to calculate. So, you know, can't really see this too well, but this was the second tour, which was in August 72. And I spotted some water. It was really, really hot. We were traveling between gigs. And I said, let's go and cool down and have a swim. Once again, the most amazing thing is that I persuaded Tony Banks to get his kit off and get in the water, which is fairly out of character. We started going touring in America for the first time. And during the sound check, I used to set up a mic by the mixing desk so Peter could come and sing from there and listen to the balance. He was checking up on me, of course. You know, these guys are all perfectionists. And that's me and Tony Banks eating carrots. Now, if we fast forward to... There'll be a date on there, but you can't see it. We had a gig in a boxing stadium in Dublin, and even in spite of the Italian success, Peter decided that he really needed to jazz things up if we were going to get on the cover of Melody Maker. So unknown to the band, he went and got, because the Foxtrot album had featured a fox with a red dress on. So basically he recreated that costume. And during a song called The Musical Box, there's a long instrumental section. He goes off stage. No one knows he's going to do this except his wife, whose red dress he was wearing. He certainly couldn't get into that now. Well, I can't really talk, can I? So when the instrumental section finished at the boxing stadium in Dublin, he appeared looking like this. And by some miracle, the band managed to keep playing. I mean, if he'd said, listen, guys, I've got this great idea. I'm going to get this mask made and wear a red dress. There's no way they would have agreed to it. Tony Banks wouldn't anyway. But song finished, and they went crazy. It was unbelievable. So it was fait accompli. So once he'd got his bit between the teeth, one of the problems with this mask is he hadn't figured to get the microphone behind it. So it didn't give the best sound, because he hadn't thought microphones, of course, were quite big. They weren't small like they are now. But sometime later, this is during Selling England by the Pound tour, they did 5 days at Drury Lane Theatre in Covent Garden, and Peter had the idea that he should ascend to heaven at the end of Supper's Ready. So we rigged up this whole thing, and there was a guy on the top of a stepladder at the side of the stage, and he jumped off, counterbalancing, and up went Peter. Health and safety, Not part of the picture in those days. Amazing what you could get away with. Ultimately, the last tour that he did with the band was The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and this character is called the Slipper Man. It's a costume depicting a venereal disease. I think it does that quite well, don't you? So the whole costume thing certainly did get the band on the front of the Melody Maker. You can't really see that, but dear Steve has shown you this already. I quit the band in '73 and they dedicated their first live album to me, cunningly entitled Genesis Live. Recorded at Free Trade Hall, this was on Mastermind as well, and the De Montfort Hall in Leicester. Yay! Let's hear it for Leicester. So, the thing is, you can't see the wording, the way this has come out, but it said, dedicated to Richard Macphail, who left April 1973. The result of this is that everyone thought I was dead. And one of the reasons, I'm still here. In front of your very eyes. One of the reasons I did this book when I retired was just to quash that myth once and for all, to show that I was still alive. So it sounds like everything's ready. So that's the first half of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. Obviously, I'm at my merch table out in the lobby there. If you go through the door and turn left on your way to the loo, I can see by the average age of most of the chaps in the audience that you'll be making that journey several times during the day. I include myself in that remark. Then come and see me, and I'd be happy to sign a book for you. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you later. Steve. Thank you.
Okay.
As his road manager. And if you can see this picture, here we are coming off stage at Nebworth. And the guy on the right is Tony Smith, not Tony Stratton Smith, Tony Smith, who was their manager after me, and sort of still is. He's done a very good job. Peter moved into a rented farmhouse, fairly derelict, outside of Bath, and in an even more derelict barn, built a recording studio. He probably put a couple of $100,000 worth of recording equipment in there, and it didn't even have a door that locked. Tony Levin was Peter Gabriel's bass player and always a very fine photographer, and we spent several afternoons fooling around with this car that the farmer's son had obviously done a cut and shut job with. It's an Austin 1100. I didn't only tour with Genesis people, I also toured with, amongst others, Peter Hamill, Bill Bruford, and Brand X, and Leonard Cohen. Peter Hamill, I know, known to many of you, as a singer of Van der Graaf Generator, and I went on the most ridiculous tour I ever took part in. He opened for Peter Tosh, who's a reggae singer. Never was there a worse mismatch in the history of music. And Peter would go on howling in his traditional way. I mean, I came to really love his music, and stuff would just rain down from a whole load of stoned Italian reggae fans who had no idea what was going on. Bit of a disaster. Can't see that. It's a clip from a television program. They made a documentary about Genesis called Genesis Together and Apart. It's always being shown on Sky. I'm sure many of you have seen it, and I played my part in it. There was a premiere in London for the documentary, and that's where I re-met, after many years, Phil and Steve, having not been part of the business for a long time. When I retired in 2015, I decided I needed something to do to stop me sitting around watching Homes Under the Hammer too much. Oh, it's a few favourites down here. So I got this book produced. I didn't write the book. I spoke the book to a journalist from Melody Maker called Chris Charlesworth, who put it all together as the product that you see today. And I launched the book at a bookshop in West London called Daunt. And there's Darryl Easley, who many of you may know his name. He writes for Mojo and Prog and lots of other magazines. He's a nice chap. And he launched the book for me. That evening, Peter, Mike, Tony and Steve showed up. Sadly not Phil, because as you know...